Okay, hello everybody. This is Simon Harris here from Barcelona. I've got the honour of kind of hosting my very first Independence Live talk. It's normally people interviewing me, and I've got the honour of talking to David McDonald, who's Deputy Leader of Glasgow City Council for the SNP. And what we're going to be talking about today is what Catalunya and Scotland can learn from each other in their independence processes. And particularly given the state of play here in Catalunya, where we're in a bit of a mess, which I'm sure I'll fill you in on throughout the talk. Yeah, I mean, we need help from the Scots, I think, to get ourselves organised. So I'm really interested in hearing David's reflections. One on how he sees what's happening in Barcelona or in Catalonia at the moment, and also filling us in on how he feels the state of play is regarding the independence movement in Scotland at the moment. Would you like to start with that, David?
Okay, thank you, Simon, and it's nice to be here on your first official or unofficial taking the lead of the Independence Live. This is my very first time, I think, other than when we met in Barcelona. This is the first time I've been on Independence Live in this form, so hopefully it will be the last as well. I think that the current situation in Catalonia is probably the best place for us to start, because I think it's the one that's most interesting for people who are going to be watching in Scotland, to try and understand just what is actually going on, because we do have some sources of information, but the information that we get is quite often second-hand information, and it's passed on. And I think because the political situation is a little bit different in the Catalan Parliament as opposed to the Scottish Parliament, it'd be good maybe to start there and figure out what is going on and what's likely to happen over the next few days. I think time is running out. I think there's only a few days left before time runs out for the Catalan Parliament before they have to call elections.
Yeah, okay. As you've given me the opportunity, I did, anyone who's watching David and I for the first time, David and I have met twice now, is it? I think both times in Barcelona. And one of the things I felt in the last video that we made together when David was over here for the Catalan elections, it was a bit me explaining Catalonia to Scotland. And it seems to me important to have the possible Catalan viewers finding out more about Scotland, because we don't have first-hand information. But as I've been given the opportunity, I'll kind of fill everybody in on the state of play. Okay, on the 27th of September, the Catalan pro-independence parties won 72 seats out of 135 in the Catalan Parliament. But unfortunately for us, they were divided between Junts pel Sí, which is the Together for Yes, very similar to the Yes Scotland campaign for your referendum. They won 62 seats, and the far-left anti-capitalist COUP, which is the popular unity candidacy, quite Trotskyist in their inspiration, who unfortunately I supported wholeheartedly throughout the campaign, won 10 seats, and it meant that the opposing parties, the unionist parties, had 63 seats against 62 seats of Together for Yes, Junts pel Sí. And the COUP have refused to validate a government led by the Junts pel Sí candidate, the Conservative Artur Mas, which many of us here, or most of us here who are in favour of the independence movement, think is a dreadful mistake. This has been the situation for the last 3 months, and if before Monday they haven't decided to invest Artur Mas, then we're going to have to go to elections again and suffer the possible consequences of the general lack of enthusiasm that this messing about has caused. So it's quite it's a depressing situation. I can't say it any more honestly than that.
I remember really vividly thinking back to the election day, being at the Bain Junts PLC event in the evening, and it was clear that the Junts PLC were going to win the largest number of seats, but pretty soon it became clear that they were going to have to rely on the coup for some support, and I think at that point people felt that the coup would maybe go through the motions of they would take a principled stance, that they would object to aftermath maybe once, maybe even twice, but eventually they would see some sense, and they would see the wider independence campaign as being more important than their own revolutionary thoughts. But that doesn't seem to have happened, and I think it's quite a disappointment for those of us who are looking on to what's happening in Catalonia to see that this really, the last few months seems to have been a big wasted opportunity. And especially now with the situation obviously in Spain having their own difficulties forming a government, it seems like this was a chance for Catalonia to strike while the iron was hot, but sadly this doesn't look as if it's been possible.
No, and it's quite interesting. This is definitely what I felt, and I campaigned in favour of coup, and I feel this is a dreadful mistake now. But basically, I feel dreadfully conned because I've got a left-wing background, and certainly on economics, on many political points of view, I'm going to argue a left-wing position. But one of the things I've come to realise is what makes me really passionate is the independence of Catalonia. It's sorted out the wheat from the chaff in my own thinking, really. And it's really depressing because on the 9th of November last year, before the first investiture debate for Artur Mas, we passed a declaration of the start of the independence process. So we're ready to go. And when I was thinking about talking to you this afternoon is this is one of the interesting differences between Scotland and Catalonia is we were ready to go with 72 seats in favour out of 135. And I was just kind of checking on the statistics or on the details, but the SNP in Scotland have got 56 seats out of 59 in the last elections. Why? This is my great question for you. Why aren't you being more militant about this?
So I think there's a lot happened over many years, I think, in the SNP. So the original party position, I think, was always that a majority of seats at Westminster would be a mandate for independence. But I think with the birth of the Scottish Parliament, the focus of Scottish politics really changed from being on Westminster to being on our own Parliament in Scotland. And the SNP's policy changed to being independence was only possible via a referendum, as it's been seen as the only legitimate way for us to be able to achieve our independence. I know it's slightly different in Catalonia, where a referendum isn't even technically possible, I think, via the Spanish constitution. Yeah. So I suppose that some people would maybe look and say that, if you get 56 out of 59 seats, then you could push ahead and just make some sort of declaration of independence. But I don't think that is really in Scotland seen as being as legitimate, because we have a UK government that at least accept that we are a nation, that we are a set of people who are able to have a referendum. You have a very different situation in Catalonia, where the Spanish government don't necessarily respect or even tolerate, I think, the Catalan Parliament or the idea of having a referendum. So it's two very different situations in that sense. So I don't think there'll ever be Scotland again that thought that if you can get a majority of seats, then you can progress towards independence. But obviously we do have our own elections coming up in a few months' time. In May, where the SNP will be looking to form potentially its third term in office as government. And obviously the First Minister kick-started the campaign, and as part of that she has said that we'll be making the call to people again to come and to consider what benefits independence might have for them. And one of the things I'm keen to try and do to promote independence is to start to try and copy a little of what has been done in Catalonia, is to move away from purely the political arguments for independence and to find some of those civic and personal arguments for independence. And so I've been looking at the work that the ANC in Catalonia, the Catalan National Assembly, have been doing, I think since 2012, where they've seen that huge civic movement in favour of independence as well as the political process. And I think that's something that we, obviously the theme of this discussion is things that we can learn from one another, and that's one of the things that I would like us to see learn from Catalonia, is trying to find that civic group as well as the political group.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is what's really interesting, is that we're almost the opposite of each other. We've got a very strong civic movement. I've been thinking about this today. I mean, politically, the independence process might go down the pan for a few years now, but the civic movement's not going to go away. Sooner or later, I'm convinced. It took me. I've been here in Barcelona since 1988, so it's nearly. It will be my 28th year now, and it took me 25 of those years before I decided that independence was the only alternative. Partly as a result of being involved in Catalan National Assembly movement, in the Catalan National Assembly movement. That emotional and intellectual position is never going to change for me now. What seems to have happened, though, is that the politicians have failed us, have betrayed us. It's the word betrayal, actually, is what's been coming to my mind over the last few days. Basically, the difference between Catalonia and Scotland is we don't have a single party, and this really has been our Achilles heel. I know that the SNP have got quite close links with Esquerra Republicana, which is the Catalan Republican left. But in the last year, since the 9th of November proxy referendum we held, in the weeks after that, all of us who have been involved felt that independence was there for the taking. And I think this is the conceptual difference between Catalonia and Scotland. We feel, those of us who are active, feel that independence is there for the taking. If you have enough of a groundswell, once you've got a sufficient democratic mandate, then we can take it. And it really is the politicians that have let us down. And it seems that the unity of the SNP in Scotland is a key factor to maintaining the movement, the arguments, the coherence of the.
I think it's been one of the things that we've been trying to explain to people is just some of the differences in the actual party politics when it comes to being pro-independence in Catalonia. So there is Convergencia, which is centre-right pro-independence party, and then there's various left options, I suppose, as well. So in Scotland, we obviously don't have that same divergent number of political parties who are pro-independence. There has been the SNP, who were the main driving force of independence for the last 18 years since the party was formed. In the more recent times, we've obviously seen the Greens and the Scottish Socialists, and now other new forces like Rise coming forward who are pro-independence. But I think the interesting thing is obviously that there was, at the referendum in 2014, there was 1.6 million people who voted for independence, and at the Westminster elections last May, I think just short of 1.5 million people voted for the SNP. So you can see there's quite a clear link that the vast majority of those people who voted yes transferred their support in May for the Westminster elections directly to the SNP. And I don't think there's a similar situation in Catalonia, because although there was the attempt to create Junts PLC and to try and bring everyone together to form that major pro-independence political force, I don't sense that that's really something that can continue. Do you think that if there are new elections in March, that the parties will stick within their current electoral pacts, or do you think you'll see parties returning to their old individual party names again?
I think this is one of the profoundly depressing things, or is what's really getting to me at the moment, is seeing the bickering between the various parties. I think most of us who got involved through the civil movements, the civic movements, like the ANC, are just so disappointed with the behaviour of our politicians, who seem to be thinking about votes and the number of seats in Parliament now, when they should. I mean, the big argument here. I've been a strong supporter of Artur Mas, who's centre-right, despite my left-wing political background. I think I've kind of joked for a long time, when Artur Mas first came to the forefront of Catalan politics, we have a political skit program, and they parodied him as a robot because he lacked personality. Now, I've recently been saying, or the last 6 months or so, I've been saying that actually he is a robot, but he's a kind of hybrid between Terminator and Buzz Lightyear, which is why I think he's a bit like, I think it's a bit similar to Winston Churchill. You kind of look at lots of parallels of other historical situations that are familiar to you, that he's the kind of person capable of leading something really incredible, but certainly wouldn't be my choice to lead the country, because I definitely want a stronger emphasis on social policy, which, as he comes from the centre right, I wouldn't trust him. I wouldn't trust he or his party to put through. So I'd support Esquerra Republicana. But as the situation is falling apart now, my only concern is, can't you find amongst yourselves a single person to head this, so that we can move forward? And the coup, because Artur Mas comes from a centre-right party, it's become a personal issue between them and Artur Mas. Well, somebody has to stand down. So if Oriol Junqueras, who's the leader of the Esquerra Republicana, the Catalan Republican left, was put forward as a candidate, or Raúl Romeva, who was the person that headed the electoral list, speaking personally, I'm not bothered. What we have to do is to be able to move forward. And the whole problem that we've got is this political fragmentation, where the only reason why Catalan independence has got so far is that it's incorporated everybody from the far left to, more than the centre-right. Convergencia is a bit like a Catalan version of the Conservative Party. And Artur Mas, although he's not such a noxious individual, politically isn't so far away from David Cameron. And it's hard to imagine, I think, for Scots that all of us are in the same bag. But that's the case. So once there's a lack of unity, all those ideological differences come to the forefront, and I mean, it's a real problem. I've got no idea how we can move forward. Somebody's got to back down between now and Sunday.
Maybe you're the man, Simon, to be the leader of this new campaign.
No, I don't think so. I have a video blog called, for anybody who's listening, I do a video blog on every Saturday called Catalonia Calling, which is on YouTube. And I was really out of order. I had to edit the swearing out of last week's edition because I was just feeling too emotional about it. And basically, I think my argument was solid that something's going wrong here, but you need to be able to moderate your language, and that's probably the reason why I'm not ideal to be. People don't vote for me.
It's a good job we're not live or anything tonight, then.
No, I behave myself very well.
I think that sense of frustration, though, is really understandable, because I've been to Catalonia twice in the last couple of years, and have seen just the amount of work that people have been putting in to their campaigning. And you can understand why people are angry, maybe and tired and frustrated, because while we've been doing the same amount of campaigning here, we at least know that there's an end product there, whereas when I was there for the 9th of November for the consultation referendum, people were putting in lots of hard work, and they knew they weren't really going to get anything back in return because the vote was going to be ignored. And then at the 27th of September last year, it's almost like a similar situation where people have, worked so hard, and certain people have maybe put their own differences aside for the greater good, and now they find themselves with the possibility that they're going to have to do it all over again, and that anything they had possibly been on the verge of winning, they might have lost. So I guess I can understand where that frustration comes from.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about the Catalan movement really has been its civic and happy nature. We've often described it as the revolution of smiles, which now it might be going down the pan. I pray to every supernatural being that exists that this doesn't happen. Frustration comes to the fore. And what's really unfortunate is the political opponents take advantage of this. So an article was published today by a member of Catalunya Pot, who is the non-independence, not unionist, but the non-independence left party, who described a lot of the outbursts that have happened over the last few days as aggressive nationalism, and said that this kind of aggressive nationalism is fascism. And I responded to the article in much the same way as you've just said now, that no, this has got nothing to do with fascism. I personally don't think I've got a fascist bone in my body. But what it is after more than 3.5 years of hard work, of campaigning, of hopes and illusions, really, for them to be let down in such a stupid way. Everybody, and when it turns into infighting, inevitably some out of order language is going to happen, I think what we need to do is we need to try and get this sense of unity back again as soon as possible. And it seems to me that the pro-independence movement in Scotland hasn't suffered this kind of internal division. You haven't embarrassed yourself in the same way.
Yeah, I think the day after the referendum, I think people kind of picked themselves up and dusted themselves off, and certainly I started receiving lots of emails and messages about people who were inspired by the campaign, who had suddenly wanted to join the SNP, and the SNP saw a huge increase in its membership after the referendum, making it, I think, the third largest party in the UK, and by far and away the largest party in Scotland. So one of the disappointing things, though, for me, is that we have lost some of the groups that were set up during the referendum, but we haven't lost any of the energy or the enthusiasm, and we do see that people have given up huge parts of their life. People have given up. In my area in Glasgow, people have been campaigning non-stop since before 2014, all the way through to the Westminster elections, and now this year gaining up again for the Holyrood election. But there is now some new forces coming forward, and I took some stick earlier today on social media because I was using the situation in Catalonia to highlight to people that the rise of the new political party here is quite similar in many ways to COOP, and that there may be a danger in the future. I don't think at this election, but in the possibility in the future that the SNP, if they are looking to try and hold a referendum, may have to rely on those other political parties within the Scottish Parliament for support for getting a referendum through. And so to look carefully at what's going on in Catalonia, to realise that you can't always rely on the people that you think are going to be your friends, and that sometimes friends turn into roadblocks. So I think I think there's 10 COOP members of Parliament, if I'm right, and they've kind of stood in the way of the 1.5, 1.6 million people who voted and who gave a mandate for independence to the Catalan Parliament at their most recent elections.
Yeah, what's even more annoying is that, okay, it's 1.6 million in total. The pro-independence vote was round about 2 million. So Junts Pel Sí got 1.6 million votes, and people like me voted for COOP because I kind of have a left-wing background, and I actually believed I wasn't voting for class war when I voted COOP. I was voting for a solid. It was a solid bet on independence, and I thought that COOP would be a. I was making a safe bet that they would push for independence, and what it turns out is that a part of the party is more interested in class war than independence. Now, I would argue that the only way we can get social justice here, and I think this is the similarity between the Scottish position and the Catalan position, is we can only have a fairer, more prosperous, a more just society if we can decide our own future. Obviously, within that context, I tend to favour left-wing parties, and I'm pro-independence because of that. But I'm not looking for a revolution. I've moved past the idealism of my 20s, and it's not Trotskyism I'm interested in. And what's even more frustrating is last week, and I got very upset about this, is that in the COOP Assembly, they had a vote on whether to instate Artur Mas, the centre-right candidate Artur Mas, or not. And the vote was 1,515 votes in favour, 1,515 votes against. And it seems like the radical Trotskyists have held sway. So even within their own party, half of them, if we're to believe these figures, which sound very unlikely to me, but I've been told off for questioning their meticulous democracy, even within their own party, half of the people favour independence over revolution. But unfortunately, it seems that the revolutionary group is holding sway, which is so deeply frustrating. You can't believe how frustrating it is.
Yeah, I don't think we quite have that same problem. I think that everyone realises that independence is just a stepping stone to that better society, and about being able to create the society that we all hope to actually live in. But before we can actually do any of that, before we can take action on things like Trident, before we can create the fairer society that we want to live in, that we need to be independent. We need to have power in our own parliament over these sort of issues. So I think everyone, regardless of which political party they are going to vote for, I think realise that that's the first step, is getting our independence, and then that's when the real hard work begins, because that's about creating the country that we want to live in.
I mean, this is very much my position. Actually, we're talking at quite a bad time. I hope I don't get flack after this for... given that I think once it's a fait accompli, once we know what's happening, I'll be able to get on and feel positive again and work for the next objective. At the moment, we're having this discussion 2 or 3 days before what seems like the end of the world. It's never really the end of the world, because if you're prepared to campaign for these things, then you get yourself up and dust yourself off. But it feels a little bit like 7 minutes to midnight at the moment, and doomsday is coming. But I'm sure we'll be able to pick ourselves up and move the process forward once this decision has been made. And also, the point of a more just society here in Catalonia. One of my arguments when we finish this interview, I'll probably be going to Sant Andreu, the part of Barcelona, the district of Barcelona where I hang out, which is kind of quite working class and left wing, and I'll bump into people and I'll have the same argument with them, that I think by nature Catalonia is left wing, and the party Catalunya Sí que es Pot, once Catalonia is independent, once the decision has been taken, the left-wing forces will have no choice but to participate in government, because if at the moment we're deciding about how to go about it. Once it's happened, then, as we saw in the Spanish general elections, the two parts of Spain that voted most left-wing were Catalonia and the Basque Country. So we don't have just the independence movements here. We have a solid left-wing background. In fact, one of my future book projects is I would like to write a radical history of Barcelona. And one of its nicknames, actually in the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, is the Rose of Fire. It's got lots of nicknames, and Barcelona Rose of Fire. It's one of the few places in the world that's actually had anarchists in government. I think it's the only place in the world that's had anarchists in government. And I think there's something inherent about this place, that it will go left once we've got independence. But we need to achieve that first. And in order to achieve that objective, we have to put these differences aside and trust in a neoliberal. I think a neoliberal president is not that bad, really, if it's only for 18 months.
Yeah, I think somebody obviously needs to be the political lead of any campaign. So we have been incredibly fortunate, I think, in the SNP to have had not only one but two outstanding political leaders in Alex Salmond, and then you think how can you follow Alex Salmond, and then along comes someone like Nicola Sturgeon, who's taken it to a whole new level, where not only is she the dominant politician in Scotland, but we saw in the UK election debates that she was an equal, if not even better than than David Cameron, and the best that the UK had to offer. She was head and shoulders above all of them. So I think if there is anything you can learn, is find yourself a Nicola Sturgeon somewhere.
Yeah, and it seems, I don't know, I'm not sure whether I pronounce her name correctly. Is it Mary Black?
Mary Black, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that you've got some real talent amongst your ranks. I'm obviously more passionate about the Catalan thing, but every now and again you come across on social media, if it's got anything to do with Scotland, I think, well, I'll take some notice. And I've seen some speeches by Mary Black that leave you gobsmacked. The coherence and eloquence for somebody so young. So you've definitely got things to feel good about. What I'm really hoping is here in Catalonia is that next week we can pull ourselves together and pick ourselves up in much the same way as Scotland has after the referendum, really.
Yeah, well, you said earlier, about feeling very low. I can tell you that the lowest I've ever felt was about 4 o'clock in the morning of the 19th of September, when we started to see various results from around the country coming in, and I had been involved with the Yes campaign in Pollock in Glasgow, in the south of Glasgow, where we had a fantastic campaign. But I think we kind of found ourselves in Glasgow and in other places that voted yes in a bit of a bubble, because we didn't really expect some of the votes from the rest of the country that we started to see. So from the low point of between 4 and 5 a.m. On the 19th of September to the high point in May, where we won 56 of those Westminster seats, that was an incredible journey, going from the lowest I've ever felt in my political career to one of the high points in just a few months is quite incredible. But I think that's also a bit of an example of what's actually happened in Scotland. So if you think back, we have only had our Parliament in Scotland for 16 years. So we've gone in a relatively short period of time in a country that's thousands of years old. In 16 years, we've made the journey from having no Parliament to having a Parliament that was thought it was going to be Labour dominated for generations, to a Parliament that now is on the verge of electing an SNP third term in government. And I think when I joined the SNP 16 years ago, if anyone had said to me that we'd be in government at that point, I would have thought they were crazy. So it's from those low points, the highs are always possible. So you should never give in.
No, I mean, I'm sure this is the case, and when you get involved in these things, and actually, I gave up, bruised and battered. I was a Labour Party member up until 1985, and I kind of gave up my involvement in politics.
Sometimes you should give up then if you're. That's the one exception.
I mean, okay. To all Scottish viewers, I'm sorry, but I am English. I didn't have a choice on these things really, but I kind of gave up active involvement in politics really after the miners' strike, because I'm from Nottingham, and it was was quite active supporting Notts miners on strike, and I suppose it all depends on what stage in life you're at. I was only 25 then, you know. I'd got lots of other mad things to be doing rather than getting involved in politics. But since I've been involved in the Catalan independence movement, it really is an emotional roller coaster, because you end up, it's you attended the proxy elections on November the 9th, 2014. I mean, for me, that was one of the most emotional days of my life. It was an amazing experience. And then we find ourselves now, between now and Sunday, I'm going to be pretty bruised and battered for a couple of weeks. But my main concern is that I'm sure the majority of people that are in favour of independence aren't going to change their minds. But it's those floating voters that it's the undecided voters that make the difference. And if we have to go to elections in March, I'm very, very doubtful if we manage we'll be able to repeat a pro-independence majority in Parliament. And okay, when you're going, it's much like the referendum that you had. The question is, when will you have another opportunity to vote on these things? Yeah, we'll have these elections in March, and have to live with this Parliament probably for the next 4 years. So it really puts everything on hold. And in many respects, I think the interesting lessons we can learn from Scotland now is, in the last year, the campaigning that you've been doing has not been so specific as it was prior to the referendum. But guys like the Independence Live people are as active as ever, and you continue putting the message out, and you continue calling on your people and calling on your supporters in order to work for a greater good for the country. At the moment, 3 days before a very difficult decision, it's hard to see the road ahead, but I'm sure we'll be able to do that.
Yeah, I think so. I think certainly from I think independence is always going to be part of whatever campaign the SNP are involved in, and it's not about putting everything on the back burner or suddenly saying that, you know, we're never going to talk about independence again. I think some of our opponents hope that would be the case, but we've got a significant portion of the Scottish population now who are pro-independence. Some of the surveys and the opinion polling showing that the vast majority of those aged 35 and under are considering voting SNP, and independence probably means there's going to be a huge generational shift in Scotland. So we know that we just need to keep working hard and keep campaigning, and that when the time is right, and when a significant change has taken place, then there will be another opportunity for us. Obviously, what we are looking at the moment is the prospect of a referendum taking place across the UK about taking the UK out of Europe, and that may be one of the factors that would trigger another referendum in Scotland, because the likelihood is, if England votes to leave the EU and Scotland votes to remain, is how do you resolve that problem? Because I think, as we saw during the Catalunya campaign, the Spanish Prime Minister, I think, confirmed that there was no process for people to lose their EU citizenship. And I think that will be an argument that people in Scotland will be keen to make, is that if they vote to remain within the EU, who are who can remove our rights as EU citizens to no longer be EU citizens if we have voted as a nation, because I think that's the one thing that we are also clear on in Scotland, is that we are a nation. The UK government have confirmed that Scotland is a nation rather than a region, which is, I think, the case in Catalonia, where the Spanish government's EU is more of a region than a nation. So I think that's going to be a big opportunity for Scotland, is what happens post-EU referendum. And I think that gives us another opportunity to go back to the people and to say, if you want to remain in the EU, as it looks like the majority of people do, then independence may be our only option to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing that interests me about this, and something I've talked with David and the other guys on Independence Live, is the difference that we have between this argument. If you don't have so much media in your favour, how do you get your message across? I mean, one of the massive advantages we have here is we have our TV3, which is a TV station run by the autonomous government, the Generalitat, is in Catalan, and I mean the Spanish government considers it a propaganda tool. It isn't. It's reasonably sensible reporting, but it tends to be in general pro-independence. We also have another Catalan television station called 8TV, which is owned by the Vanguardia newspaper, which is also, I mean, it's not pro-independence, but it's certainly not anti-independence. So we have the opportunity to get our message across much more easily, I think, than you do in Scotland. You seem to have your hands tied as far as the media's concerned, with the great exception of Independence Live, obviously. But with all due respect, it's not it's alternative media, and so it's a fantastic initiative. But not everybody's watching internet. Yeah,
I think the new media and social media have been a huge part, and I think in terms of mobilising people who were pro-yes or to become involved in politics and to become active. We obviously now do have at least one newspaper that takes a pro-independence line in the form of The National, which was launched after the referendum. But that's never going to be a newspaper that is read by people who aren't already voting or who aren't already pro-independence. So I don't think we are ever going to be in a position where we see some of the major newspapers coming out and taking pro-independence viewpoints. The way that we've managed to get that message across is purely through the hard work of the campaigners, I think, who have been going door to door and taking the message about what an independent Scotland would look like. So I was very struck the first time I came to Catalonia to take part in the political campaigning that there wasn't that same door-to-door canvassing that took place, and that when they said they were going out campaigning, it meant they were going out to stand at a street corner and to stop people and basically doing what a street stall that we might do on a Saturday afternoon. But beyond that, there wasn't the same level of political campaigning, and I don't know if that's something that will ever necessarily change, because it's certainly in the cities like in Barcelona, it doesn't really lend itself to being able to easily canvass door to door, because the vast majority of buildings are high rise, not necessarily high rise, but medium rise apartment blocks. So I don't know if that's maybe something that could be learned.
We actually. Yeah, sorry. We actually did do. We've canvassed once, as far as I know, and I went out. I canvassed twice for the ANC, the Catalan National Assembly, and that was just before November the 9th. It was possible to do. I mean, I think, obviously being British, I think we should do a lot more of this. But what Catalans are really good at is the festive atmosphere of things. And I think, to be perfectly honest, with all due respect, there's an element there's an element of the weather actually in this. The fact that our weather is so, I mean, you can do stuff outside, and you know you're going to get thousands of people, and talking to some of the guys on Independence Live, you know, it seems to me that 10,000 is a good turnout in Scotland. I mean, 10,000 is just fair to middling here. We think it's okay when it's 50,000 upwards, and I think that's because we're so used to being out in the street and doing things in the street. And I mean, if you canvass, I canvassed, and the big problem is a lot of the people just aren't in. And because we have this going out atmosphere, so or this street culture, and so it makes doing things outside a lot easier. Having said that, I think canvassing is essential, because then you have the opportunity to talk to people one-to-one who wouldn't necessarily be interested.
Yeah, I think certainly from our point of view, there's no amount of media can really beats that kind of face-to-face interaction with somebody who's hopefully going to vote for you or your party, and finding out what's important to that person. I think it's hugely important, and the reason that certainly the SNP has been so successful, but also the reason why I think the pro-independence campaign will be successful again in the future, is because we've been able to keep and record lots of that information. So we now have a bank of information about who people vote for, where those people live, how we can get in touch with them again for future elections. So I think that's hugely important, having that level of detail about how people actually vote. So I think that's one of the big reasons that level of hard work that's taken place from members of political parties right through to councillors and MSPs and MPs is the real reason that we've seen that success from an SNP perspective, and I think in the future from a pro-independence campaign as well.
Yes, delighted actually. Yes, is nationalist. Yeah, David McGowan has just told me a question from one of the viewers. Is nationalist used as a pejorative term in Catalonia? Yes and no. I don't. As someone British, I don't really like the term nationalist, and it's a term that in many cases can easily be used as a term of abuse. I always tend to use the term Catalanist, although quite a lot of Catalans are happy to use the term nationalist, Catalan nationalist. And I think what's interesting, and one of the things that's really interesting in talking to people from other, in inverted commas, nationalist movements, is I think we need to reclaim this idea, and nationalism as we're talking about it now, in 2016, 2015, 2016, has got nothing to do with the nationalism that they throw at us from the 1930s. We tend to be, or certain, it's not necessarily always left-wing in Catalonia, but I think one of the interesting things about developing this dialogue with Scotland and Kurdistan and Quebec and the Flemish in Belgium or pretty much wherever, is that it's about governments of proximity and controlling your own future. It's certainly not about hating anybody else. It's got nothing to do with hating Spain. The problems come with Spain, and I suppose come with England, when the controlling country becomes an obstruction. But it's actually got nothing to do with the individual nations. What do you feel about that, David?
I think it's very interesting, because I was at the Anglo-Catalan Society held their conference in Glasgow a few months ago, and I was the only non-Catalan in the room, I think. And there was a question very similar to this about, would anyone here describe, who the vast majority of people in the room were pro-independence, I think, and when we asked if people would describe themselves as nationalists, nobody put their hands up. So I think and it's difficult for Scottish people to say, but there is the phrase of independentist, I think, if I've said
Yeah,
that correctly, which
yes.
seems to translate as somebody who believes in independence, and I think that's quite a handy phrase because it's probably a catch-all for people from various backgrounds and groups. But I think I've had this problem speaking to people from across Europe because there's a European understanding of what a nationalist is, which I think is very different to what we in Scotland would think of when we say nationalist. You know, we don't mean somebody of from a far right perspective in the way that you maybe think of in Europe. So we have tended, though, to call ourselves civic nationalists to try and help make people understand that it's not in any way an ethnic nationalism that we're promoting. It's about that civic nationalism of people who believe that independence is the best political tool to create that fairer society that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, when you were over in September, I can't remember her surname, but Al, there was an English SNP member with you, who was completely behind your cause in much the same way as I. I mean, I'm English. How on earth can you accuse me of being a Catalan nationalist? I've got no obvious, nationalistic racial reasons. And in fact, on Twitter the other day, we had a bit of a set to, and it was somebody accusing Catalan nationalism of being exclusive and racist. And so I piped in. I think it was it's a Tunisian guy who's in support of the Catalan independence movement, piped in. A German girl got involved in the conversation. And we also pointed out that the Catalan nationalist or Catalan independentist movement, it's also got a group called Sumate, who are Spanish-speaking. So, and one of the big mistakes that Podemos made in the far-left Spanish party, that Podemos made during the campaign for the elections in September, was they tried to make this division. The truth is, here in Catalonia, and the reason why Catalan independence is working is lots of the children of people who migrated here in the 60s and 70s have grown up in Catalonia supporting Barca, speaking Catalan. So it's certainly not a genetic thing. It's you. I think there's an element of identifying with the territory you live in. And this is certainly how I feel. I feel, and it's not some crass identity thing. I've lived in Catalonia for 28 years. I'm on my second Catalan wife now. I've got Catalan children. I'll probably die here. Doesn't it make sense that I should campaign in favour of a better, fairer government for everyone? And it's no more complex than that for me, really. Yeah. Okay, David's asked me another question, and he's asking, can I recommend any English language media from Catalonia? There's not very much, actually. Okay, and I'm going to promote myself. Every Saturday I do a video blog called Catalonia Calling, where I might be a little bit irreverent at times, I admit. But what I try and do is I try and give a review of the situation in Catalonia from a very, very personal point of view. And my angle is, I'm an English guy living here. I'm trying to explain to you what's happening. VilaWeb, which is VILAWEB.cat, has an English section which is more or less successful. The Catalonian News Agency, and I think their website is the Catalonian News Agency.cat, also has information in English, and it seems to have gone quiet at the moment, but Help Catalonia. And also, I'd recommend, David, the SNP Friends of Catalonia Facebook group, where hopefully I would like to collaborate more. I think one of the fruitful things that can come out of this conversation is that we can get more two-way collaboration going. Okay, David's asked me another question. How can we improve the links between Catalonia and Scotland? And as I've been answering all the questions so far, David, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think that's been one of my big frustrations, and also the lack of available English language news in terms of what's been going on in Catalonia. Was one of the reasons that myself and a few other people have recently established the SNP Friends of Catalonia, which is available both on Facebook and on Twitter. And the Twitter feed in particular does its best to translate using people who speak a little bit of Catalan, but also probably mainly using Google Translate manages to provide some information in terms of what's happening in Catalonia, so you can find that on at SNP Catalonia on Twitter, and also SNP Friends of Catalonia on Facebook. Is one of the best ways of keeping up to date with what's happening. But with that group, we're keen on people, and although it is an SNP group, we are saying that if you're a pro-independence person, you can also support that. But we are keen that SNP members become more involved with that, because what we would like to do is arrange more regular exchanges between Scotland and Catalonia. So while Simon, you are not necessarily looking forward to having another set of elections in March, it does present for us an opportunity to escape the rain and to.
Yeah, as you know, you'll be more than welcome, and we'll definitely get to have some beers and football involved in this. So I mean, it's really great. We've met each other twice now, and it's really satisfying to have people come over. And I think for the referendum, quite a few Catalans went over to Glasgow in particular. And I mean, we need to get people there physically. And something else I want to mention is I've recently joined Kilter, because I spoke to Eric Sandberg in one of these live streams the other day. And so I hope to be publishing information on Kilter as well. And the aim from our point of view, my aim is to get as much information out there as possible. I think also what you need to do is you need to get your stuff back over here. Get in touch. I know plenty of Scottish people who I'm sure would be interested in campaigning for you here, and I think the SNP and the Scottish independence movement needs to have more people on the ground here, actually. Okay, I think that's all the questions. It's been great. It's been great seeing you, David. It's great talking to you. Hopefully, we'll do more of this in the future. I know it's been your first time, but I think it's a very fruitful thing to do, and it's a really great way of exchanging ideas in a non-pressured fashion.
It's been fantastic. Thank you, and congratulations on doing such a good job on your first time of being in control.
Well, and yeah, thanks everybody for watching. Please tune in. Keep, and we'll try and keep you as posted as possible on Independence Live on everything that's happening in Catalonia. There's not only me, but there's Mark North as well. Plenty of people trying to keep you up to date. And so I always finish everything I say with Visca el Barça, because I'm a big Barca fan, Visca Catalunya, and Visca Escocia. So have a great time, everyone, and big thanks to David for joining me.
Thank you.